Alrighty, so we can just take this off. I'll arrange it, okay? Okay. Sorry, this is all a little bit discombobulated. I got up very early, and then I somehow lost track of myself, which isn't so unusual. And it was really later than I thought. But anyway, fortunately, I had some things in order. So this idea for this particular talk has been around for a while. I guess I didn't gasho before I started. I might miss a gasho here or there. So anyway, I have been working on this. I had too much lead time. I'm one of those people that if I complain about short notice, but actually I do better that way. And so this is the beginning. This title of this talk was my encounter with the Genjokoan. And it's a bit of a story, not too long a story, I hope. And I don't really know at what point, I don't know. At some point, I probably talked to Adriel about this. And then somewhere along the line, I think there was some notion of doing Genjokoan this fall. And we've done it probably 3 times over the course of many years here. I found all my study packets. And so those were classes, much more formal study classes than we've done in a while. So I just a word about the Genjokoan and located in time and place. So it's the first chapter of the Shobogenzo by Dogan. Dogan Gensen was the founder of this school, Soto Zen. Many of you know that. So that this is written, the Genjokoan was written in 1233. And by that time, he had established his own monastery after having been in China for a period of time. So this really, and then it becomes the first chapter of the Shobogenzo, which is a compilation of writings of 75 chapters. So this is a very significant, important chapter or writing. And Okimura, whose translation I think we'll be using this fall, is really considers the Genjokoan to be the kind of ultimate basic, both ultimate and basic expression of Dogen's understanding, of his deep expression of his understanding of the Buddha Dharma. So it's a significant piece. And so that's what the Genjokoan is. We're not going to spend a lot of deep time today, a long time, talking about it or discussing it. That's what Adriel's going to teach this fall. But that would not be something I would take on in any case. So this is really about my experience with the Genjokoan, which is started a long time ago. So to just talk a little bit about time and place, I think this was probably 1964, maybe, no, 1964. I was in my late 20s. I had 4 children and a husband. Obviously, they had a father. And we were living in New York in a very beautiful area up the Hudson River, if you know that area, Hartsdale, White Plains. My husband was teaching in an experimental school district based on something called the Princeton Plan, which eliminated segregated schools, eliminated neighborhood schools. All children in the district went, so on. So this was a very exciting thing that was happening. Civil rights movement was ramping up around somewhere in there. I saw Martin Luther King for the first time. I was involved in 2 different groups that were doing civil rights work, one around housing, one around preparing for big operations in Mississippi, which was known as the Kofo Summer, in which the 3 civil rights workers were killed immediately, if you remember any of this. Anyway, it was an intense time. In the world, it was an intense time. It was beginning of the decade of assassinations, and an intense time in that way. And of course, I was reading James Baldwin. I was also reading a lot, and I read probably 2 times as much as I read now. I don't really know how I did that. But the atmosphere, so that was what was going on in the world. What was going on at home was really difficult. No one knew that in our milieu. My husband was a teacher. We lived in a really quite lovely garden apartment area, and we looked good on the outside. I had 4 beautiful children, and so what was going on the inside was quite different. And so this outside was maintained. There was a lot of good things happening and intense things happening. And on the inside was a kind of perpetual tension that I don't know that I even fully allowed myself to realize at the time. And so while everything looked calm and there was day-to-day order, and if you have children or don't, you understand that things have to happen in somewhat of an orderly way. People have to be fed, people have to get ready for school, stories are read, bedtime, this is all happening, and you have to be present to it. So it can seem somewhat normal, but there's this underground sense that any moment, something's going to snap and there's going to be whatever, whatever. So I don't know how much I let that in really. I was pretty good at practicing this front, although I don't know that I even quite saw it that way. So I was reading a lot, and so in the process, so I don't really have good memory. I don't have good memory of I know I went to the library all the time with kids. I remember being in the stacks. I don't know. I also, I think, had some book subscription kind of thing. I was reading a lot of magazines of that time, the New Republic, of course, Commentary magazine, which was really no longer exists, some of these. But somehow there was certainly an atmosphere, beginning to be an atmosphere of paying some attention to Buddhism. And a little bit of, there was a sociologist, Eric Fromm, some of you may have read books by him. And so I think, I was going to look this up, I didn't. I think I had read one of his books discussing Buddhism and psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. So that was a range of reading. I don't know, but one day I obviously got this, not this copy, but this volume from the library. I don't know why. I have no memory of saying, oh, I want to read that. Nothing. I just know that I read it. So there is my life over here, and the realization then of this situation, and putting it all, kind of keeping it pushed back, and meanwhile living this life that I've described. And then I'm reading this book, and in those days, if I read a book, there was a law that you finish the book, right? You'd read everything. There was a law, and I did never violate that law until I got old enough to say, this isn't really happening for me. I don't think I'll finish it. So I'm reading, and I got to this place, and this is what I read.
What's the book?
The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. I'm sorry. And this is on page 124 from the chapter called Empty and Marvelous. Now, Alan Watts, I could say a little bit, Tinkan knows much more about him than I do, but I wouldn't really say he was a popularizer, but he definitely wrote about Buddhism in a way that it was more accessible. And keep in mind, Dogan had not been translated into English at this time. This book was written first date is 1954. I think this printing was 1966. So it's just right there, right at the 65 is the first ever English translation by someone. But I don't think, but Watts did it. That had not happened when he first originally wrote this book. Okay, so I'm going to read you. This is a passage from the Genjokoan, which some of you, of course, I'm sure will know. When a fish swims, he swims on, and there is no end to the water. When a bird flies, he flies on, and there is no end to the sky. From the most ancient times, there was never a fish who swam out of the water, nor a bird who flew out of the sky. Yet when the fish needs just a little water, he uses just a little. And when he needs lots, he uses lots. Thus, the tips of their heads are always at the outer edge of their space. That's a great image, I think. Can you see that fish? If ever a bird flies beyond that edge, he dies. And so also with the fish. From the water, the fish makes his life, and from the sky, the bird. But this life is made by the bird and the fish. At the same time, the bird and the fish are made by life. Thus are the fish, the water, and life, and all three create each other. It goes on a bit. Yes, if there were a bird who first wanted to examine the size of the sky, or a fish who first wanted to examine the extent of the water, and then try to fly or to swim, they will never find their own ways in the sky or water. And so now a very short commentary by Watts. This is not a philosophy of not looking where one is going. It is a philosophy of not making where one is going so much more important than where one is, that there will be no point in going. That last sentence a little bit awkward, I think. So I read this, and I don't really know what happened, but lights went off, trumpets blared, doors flew open, and that was it. I don't know, something momentous happened that I could really be melodramatic and say that what happened probably, well, it for sure changed my life. Could have saved my life, maybe. I don't even know if that's true, but it was. So what was happening, you see, I was living a life of if when this happens, when that happens, when, then everything will get better. Well, when he finishes his master's, well, when this certain job happens, well, when we finally get the dairy farm in Vermont and the Vermont farm, on and on and on, all of which was doable, all of which had happened, sort of. And each time, something happened. And there was upheaval and chaos, and then all reestablishing normalcy again, or what was presumed to be normalcy, right? And this had happened more than once in, not even 10 years. And I'm already 27. I have these 4 children. And that's how I had been living. And I read this and I said, I can't, this cannot, and it was already in what was actually happening in real life at the moment was the whole situation with the job. And so there was beginning to be the usual cracks, like cracks in the ground, appearing in what looked like a stable situation. It was beginning, the tremors were beginning. So you could predict what was going to happen. So I read this and I said, hallelujah, basically. And nothing in the moment happened except inside of me. And that living, if and many years later when I read this, I thought, I'm not quite sure what it took a long time, which is another whole interesting piece of this. But anyway, I couldn't have cognitively told you how this applied to my life, right? Now it seems perfectly obvious. Well, anyway, I don't know if that makes sense to you. So it took a while. My life did change. I moved back to the West Coast with my children and eventually went back to school and finished my degree, which I, of course, had dropped out of school when I started having children. So I finished my undergraduate degree and got a master's degree and eventually was practicing my profession. And by that time, I think my oldest child was probably going off to first year in college. So obviously, time had passed, things had happened. And somewhere around 1975, I moved to Eugene. And so that was going along. I taught for some years at the university, and some friend of mine, and by the way, so all the years in California, this is Buddhism is sort of teasing over here. Never, never, never forgot this. I still read Buddhist books sometimes, and was aware of San Francisco Zen Center, was aware of what was happening at Tassajara, which became the mountain monastery. So that was all out there, and it was more and more around me, people being involved, things happening. My mother had become very involved in Self-Realization Fellowship, which is Yogananda. So meditation was happening in the family. And so it was always in the back of my mind that I was going to do this. It just, there was a lot going on. I had a lot to do, but it was always there. And so especially then I got to Eugene. Eugene in those days, well, I guess it still is, but it was definitely a fermenting kind of place. A lot was happening. It's the way things were being done in terms of people doing communes, people doing collectives, introducing all kinds of new products. It was a lot happening that would have been described probably as New Age. And in that, of course, meditation groups were happening around town. I had several people I knew were involved in Tibetan Sanghas and so on. So then in the midst of this, a friend of mine said, you know, I've been going to the Zen group, and maybe you'd like to come. And that seemed okay. The door just opened. All right, I'm going to do this. And that group was being led or facilitated by a priest who trained at San Francisco Zen Center, Gary McNabb, who died earlier this year. And that was probably the second kind of explosive experience. You know, sometimes maybe some of you had this experience. You first start sitting, or you first start becoming familiar, open to this teaching, and there's a kind of in love for a while. And it's really marvelous, right? So that really happened, but all sorts of, it seemed to me, levels of understanding of a whole aspect of meditation, of Buddhism, that I hadn't really seen happen. And I don't know that I can explain that, but what I would associate with that time was vivid, bright, golden light. And that lasted a while. Anyway, eventually that group, there was some amount of not disintegration, but changes. And eventually a woman named Lois Diller, which is where Gary had an early morning sit at Lois's house, and I think a discussion group one night a week. We went through a period of studying the precepts, and but we never did any formal study. I mean, Dogan would get mentioned, but there was never any formal study. So I didn't encounter any of that time the Genjokoan. Anyway, Lois then came back from being in California, and we decided we would go to the Eugene Zendo, which was on Potter Street. And I know some of you have heard about that. And a woman named Gretchen Brox was the person that led that little sit once a week. Keoghan Carlson from Dharma Rain in Portland came once a month. That's when I first met Thelma and Mion. And so he would come once a month and do a talk. We'd have a potluck. So that was what was happening. We didn't know what was going to happen. Gretchen was leaving to go to Portland, retiring. And Ajo started coming as just a person to come. And I think he'd written to Gretchen, he was looking to start a center. So the timing here was pretty perfect, because we were not wanting to just dissolve our little group, but we weren't sure where we were going to go and how we were going to do it. And suddenly a priest shows up. And the main thing I noticed in the beginning was he could chant. That was great. Somebody can actually chant in this group. So there were lots of meetings and discussions. Keoghan came down, Hogan from Zen Community of Oregon. There were meetings, and it was decided that this was what would happen. So was a year or two before we actually got settled here. We moved here in 2002. In the meantime, we were meeting at a house that Ajo and his family rented and converted the garage. And Kyogen still came occasionally, so he was there. And there would always be a potluck and some social time, and people were sitting around talking. And someone, I don't know who, I don't remember the context, I only remember a few lines. Someone mentioned the Genjokoan, and then someone mentioned this verse and quoted a couple of lines. And that was the first time I knew where that came from. So now I know where it came from. Well, then we moved here, and Ajo started teaching really in a more formal way, and somewhere in those early years, I don't know, I don't have a date, he taught the Genjokoan. So now I had it. And I still get a little chill thinking about that. But what was interesting in that is that when I read it, I think I had closed off so much of what had been going on in those times in New York, that I did it. When I read it, I thought, okay, this is great, but why was it so impacting? I couldn't really see it. It just maybe it made sense cognitively, but I didn't quite. It just I don't know. I was missing something. So that went on. We, I think, studied it 3 times, and then along the way, of course, uh, we did Jukai, April 24th, 2005. I got to get all these dates. I called Issei. I had to get all the dates straight. So that was Issei, myself, Mioban, and a woman named Sydney, and I can't remember her Dharma name, but she's living in Boise right now. So it was the 4 of us. We were the second group to go. There had been 3 people previously who did Jukai, and I think one other person, but we were the second group. So things were still, not so tight organizationally. But anyway, that was 2005. And with that decision became more and more in my mind then the question of taking a teacher, of having a teacher. And I had pretty much resolved, you understand, I was fairly old when all this was happening, and that I would never have a teacher. Someone had said to me, well, it's karma. When you meet your teacher, Well, that hadn't happened yet. I mean, this guy was 27. I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay, well, we'd at least get into his 30s. So anyway, things moved along, but then I started to be preoccupied by this question. And there are various writings about you need a teacher. You actually do. If you're on the path, you actually need a teacher. So this went on and on. But I started thinking about it. So sometime in 2007, and I don't know when exactly, I asked Ajo, and I think, I believe in those days you had to ask 3 times. So anyway, he said yes, and unbeknownst to me, Issei had made the same decision. I don't know, she may have made it way before me. I don't know. We never discussed it, but at some point we were informed about each other, and that the ceremony was going to be January. And so that seems like a long time ago now. But anyway, I think I went to Hawaii just before that, and to see a friend there. And the only reason I mention that is because I was having a lot of dreams in Hawaii I dreamed about the Zendo. I was dreaming about, I don't remember all of it, but some huge white Buddha, Ajo. So it seemed as though everything was lining up, at that unconscious level. Things were, I didn't really know a lot of meaning about that, but that was what was happening. I came back. We had the ordination ceremony, and Gensei, I believe that was when he took posthumously the 3 of us. So it was a big day, an important day, and a powerful ceremony. And at that point, at that time, I was able to get up every time off my knees. And that was a major concern. Would I be able to? And I haven't been following this, but I should check a little bit ahead. Okay, so that's January 2008, and the Museum of Art at the University of Jordan Art Museum had decided to do Buddhist visions. They were doing month-long speakers. There was beautiful exhibit of Buddhist art, and there were speakers and presentations, and I don't know how the time is. And anyway, that was happening, and one of the people that was going to come, and I don't know if I'll pronounce it correctly, was the great calligrapher Tanahashi, right? Tanahashi, and Kaz actually. And so he was going to be coming, doing a demonstration, and whatever activities. But he also was the translator of Dogan. And the first translation in 1965 was Kaz and Robert Aiken, Roshi Aiken, who was the abbot at the Diamond Sangha in Honolulu. So they had published a translated version of the Genjokoan in 1965. Well, I think by that time I knew that. I knew that they had been the first translators. In 1985, there was the Shobogenzo, the whole thing, with many, many collaborators from the San Francisco Zen Center. So he's going to be here. I'm aware that that had happened. And that was wonderful. There was a demonstration at the Art Museum where he demonstrated his calligraphy, which he did on the floor. Not only is he a calligrapher, he's also a Zen teacher. So everything was wonderful. I think we did as much as we could, went to as many things as we could. And it was this rich month of Buddhism and art. And so he was going to do a talk here. He did do a talk here. We were going to have a potluck, and a lot of other Buddhist people in town came, Mark Uno, his father, so on. So we have this potluck, and there was a visiting time. People are milling around talking, and so I spoke with him, asked him about the translation and all that, and then I asked him, did he know that Alan Watts had quoted had quoted parts of the Genjokoan in something he'd published in the Way of Zen in 1960. He said, no, he didn't know about it. And would I photocopy those pages for him? Well, I said yes. And so anyway, then there was going to be an exhibit of his work at the White Lotus Gallery. And so I have another opportunity to bring it to him. And I don't know if you know his work, but it's quite beautiful. And when I got there and saw all these works, well, there was absolutely no way except that I should buy one, right? Seems perfectly clear. I had to do that. So I'll show it to you. You're going to do that for me. So I really focused. So this is called boundlessness. I don't know if everyone can see it. We can turn this around and then turn it the other way. So thank you. So this is called boundlessness, and I had a great difficulty making a decision because there was one that was that marvelous red circle, which of course I love red, and I had a hard time deciding. And when I was deciding, I never focused on the word, the title, only on the image. So I still have visions of that red one, but I got this. So this hangs at home above my Kuan Yin altar. So when I was preparing this, trying to prepare this talk and going through everything, I realized that I had never really focused on the word boundlessness, and that that word without limits, right? Without limits, boundless. You don't think of it. There's no container. There's no place where boundlessness is. So I did really start thinking about all of that now, and then it seemed to me that boundlessness, that the Dharma is boundless, right? It is Dharma, and that again somehow I have this pattern of things happening, and I don't quite know they're happening, and I think that somehow I bought this, and I don't know, actually I don't know, you might look, if the image is in any way an exaggeration of characters.
So it's the character is ku, shikisoku de ku, kusoku de shikiku, and the style is called Gyosho, which is much more fluid
Right.
than the
Uh-huh.
basic form.
All right. Well, do the characters have any relationship to the title, Boundlessness?
Yes, I think that maybe he chose that style because it's so very.
Uh-huh. So the style expresses the word.
Yes, I think so. It's ku is boundless, and it also means sky.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The fluidness.
Right.
Sky is boundless.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you. Well, if you don't know, we have a calligrapher here in our midst. Thank you. So anyway, so that is what I chose, and in preparing this, I really did feel that you know, I don't quite know who chose it, but I did, and I don't think I mentioned, I left something out. I just have to say it. You know where I bought this book? This book. Well, I bought this book from Gertie's. Gertie was a marvelous bookmobile bus, and Ezra Tishman, Miobin's lovely husband, had that bus for years, and I always loved visiting Gertie. So that's where I bought the book, which also I was so happy to buy it from Gertie's. Anyway, back to the story. So that really in writing all of this and going through this, somehow somehow the business of cause coming of meeting him, of actually having that whole experience, seemed as though all these pieces had fallen into place and a story had emerged. And that as I was writing this, again, same thing happened as some other thing had happened that I didn't really realize until I started thinking about all this in the last few weeks or whatever, that this happened in the same month as we took ordination. And that was not planned. That decision was entirely Ajo's, probably based on the Sangha or the Zendo calendar for that month. The only part of my bit part of that was simply asking, deciding, making a decision, deciding, asking. The decision of the date was not my doing. Certainly, University of Oregon, the Art Museum, made their plans quite independently of me and the rest of us. So all of these things came together in this time, and including buying this, including living with this. And so I think when, you know, thinking about this, one of the things, and I think this probably was came from Ajo talking about this, that we may not always be on the path. We may fall away. We may not come for a while. We may not sit for a while. But it doesn't mean anything leaves us inside. Doesn't mean that we aren't still carrying and being carried. A seed gets planted, and the seed may not emerge. We may not see the flower for a long time, but it doesn't mean the seed is not carrying us. We're still carrying that seed. And at some point, it emerges and the flower blooms. and we may, and then just be, I have this sense of you get one foot, I got one foot on the path, sort of, and it took a long time to get both feet here, long time, but it didn't go away. Nothing, it was always here. I mean, I experienced it that way. I didn't forget it. It was somehow this murky intention out there that I didn't act on for a long time. And somebody else actually initiated and said, hey, I'm going to this, I think you'll like this person. I'm going here, come with me. I don't know, would I have found it on my own? Who knows? But I found it through my friend, and maybe it would have happened some other way. But I think that this is so important in the teaching to keep the faith. Remember our deepest intentions, whether we have neglected them, get back. They come up. I once talked to someone here a long time ago. He'd been coming. We had some connection, and then he disappeared for a while. And then he showed up again. And I said, oh, it's great to see you. Where have you been? And he said, well, I kind of fell off doing my practice. And then I felt so guilty I didn't come. And then the more I didn't come, the more. And I said, well, that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I quit smoking, but I had a cigarette on Sunday, so that's it. Got to smoke again. That this is a common thing we do to ourselves. So I encourage you to not do that. And remember, you're still carrying that seed. So I think I'm coming to the end here pretty much. I don't know if I wrote some important things here that I haven't said. The one thing I did forget is that when I read this now in preparing this, it seems totally obvious how come that impacted me the way it did when I was. It's like, how could I have never? How come I didn't see that for a whole long period of time? When you have a realization, then you think that was so obvious. How come I didn't see that all along? Well, I recently had that experience, and I think it feels to me as though I read this now from some much deeper layers than for all the years I was so busy and pushing stuff away. So I would just add that as we read and study things that one time didn't quite click, they may click later, or they may click in a whole different way, a whole different perception. So that's why we keep doing the same thing over and over, right? Saying the same sutras over and over, reading the same sutras over and over, because we are over and over, right? We're perpetual, but over and over. So I was going to close with reading, and this is a little bit, maybe not in the mood, but this is a paragraph from a commentary by the person that Ajo likes. This, I believe, the translation he likes by Okamura. And then, so this is how we'll close. Dogan said, all things coming and carrying out practice enlightenment through the self is realization. In this case, the self is a part of all beings. In that network of interdependent origination, we are supported in a very, it is a part of all beings. We are produced by all beings. Since we human beings are born in a very immature state, we cannot survive the first years without protection of our parents, our community. We need to learn many things. We learn how to think, how to express our feelings, how to, as human beings, be a part of the network of interdependent origination. We are produced by all beings, and we become part of all beings, and we maintain the network of all beings. Whether we understand the reality of interdependent origination or not, we are part of it. So, thank you so much. And probably there's time for questions, comments. And I didn't read to you. I brought other books, but I was going to read you the 1965 version of the translation, but all that gets tedious. to start comparing translations.
Jun-e,
Yes.
thank you thank you so much for that. It's really marvelous to hear the unfolding. And since you mentioned Ezra, my lovely husband, he always talks about the unfoldingness thereof. He's like, trust in the unfoldingness thereof, and he's very trusting.
The unfolding of what?
The unfoldingness thereof.
Oh, thereof.
Right?
That's
Like
a great word. A
unfoldingness
great word.
of life, right?
Yes.
That sense of being carried as much
Yeah.
as we think we're carrying. The intention carries us, we carry the intention.
Right, right.
And, what do you do when it just feels murky? Like, do you, Jun-e, always have that trust in you? That it is actually unfolding even if you can't see it? Do you have moments where you're not trusting in that? And then how do you meet that?
Okay. That's a great question. I do have moments. They over time, they got smaller and smaller. The moments of despair or of getting back into that morass of self, where that morass of self feels like the whole world, right? That room. We can get in that room. We forget there's anything outside that room. Well, that over time, and I encourage you to live a long time if you can, so you can have this experience. Unless some people have very blinding insight happening young. But those, I would say those moments have become less. It's not that they never happen. The day Uvalde happened, I cried. I couldn't find. I cried half. Or the fires are burning in my beloved Mackenzie Valley, whatever. So various, but however, in terms of me, it has become and did become, I think, once some experience, these kind of experiences validate that faith. So as much as we can notice in our life, and that doesn't mean, though, there aren't times where I feel despair or I feel sad or what all that range of stuff. But it doesn't. I can pretty much stay out of the room. And I credit the practice. I credit just for most of the time we've been here. Most of the time, I would say almost not 100%, but pretty close. I always feel better after I come here. Or so I would say that. I don't know if does that answer. And I think it's hard to keep the faith sometimes during, if you really get locked in the room for a while. And some people are, have more of a danger of that than others, or we go through very, some hard times in our lives. And it's not that I haven't had suffering and loss. However, there are some very ultimate big ones, which, many people in this room have experienced. And so, it's understandable to have times of despair, I think. So thank you. Tingon.
I grew up in New York. I'm a New Yorker. And three of the people you mentioned who were killed were classmates of mine.
Oh, wow. Two of the three men? Two of those people?
No, three of them.
Oh, three.
Yeah.
All three of them.
Yeah. We went to Queens College, City University of New York.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know them
Right.
particularly, but they're from my class. And I read Alan Watts. That's where I discovered Buddhism.
Right. Well, there we are.
He was the only one writing about it.
That's right. And I remember us talking about Alan Watts. Yeah.
And so, I didn't know you came from New York.
Well, I don't come from New York. I actually was born in Oklahoma, grew up in California, but I was living in New York for a period of time.
Oh, okay.
I actually really liked Westchester, that area.
I lived in Long Island.
Right. Yeah. So Well, I just have to tell Tenkan something here, which isn't really relevant. But I once went to a workshop. You know, Alan Watts lived on a houseboat in Sausalito. Did, and he must have rented it out because I went to an Eureka, we won't talk about what that was, a workshop there. I don't know when that was. I suppose it was the 70s, right?
Probably.
But he was very good, Alan Watts.
Yeah. I never heard him speak. I never met him or anything.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't either.
Just reading him. Yeah.
But you mentioned him, and I realized that was part of my life.
Right. Well, we are of a pretty close in age, Tenkan.
Buddhism wasn't around,
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. You couldn't just walk down the street and find a place to go.
but I had gone to Catholic school,
Right.
and that finished me religion.
I know. Yeah.
And the spiritual thing was coming in with non-theistic.
Right. But here you are, and here you've been. So, thank you.
Jun-e, I was wondering if you would be willing to. Would you be willing to read the quote from the Alan Watts book again?
Yes,
that
sure.
We have the calligraphy.
Sure. So the commentary one,
The
where he makes a commentary, his commentary on the
the passage.
Yeah.
From the Genjokoan.
You want me to read the whole passage?
The short part.
Oh, okay. This is just, you mean the Alan Watts part? Okay. Yes, if there's a bird. Okay. Yet, if there were a bird who first wanted to examine the size of the sky, or a fish who first wanted to examine the extent of the water, and then try to fly or to swim, they will never find their own ways in the sky or the water. Is that the part, right? Okay. Anything else? Well, thank you all very much for listening and being attentive. Saranam gacchami Dhammam saranam gacchami Sangham saranam gacchami Udiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami Udiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami Udiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami Adhyampi Buddham saranam gacchami Adhyampi Sangham saranam gacchami Adhyampi Sangham saranam gacchami